Well, welcome everybody back to the channel, and this is going to be another episode of how to make your Geo Metro faster. You may wonder why, so watch along with me. So if you stuck around after the intro there, you'll know that I've been waiting on Project Freetro's motor to get back from the machine shop so that we can make some more how to make your Geo Metro faster series videos. So those videos are going to start back up this weekend. So in this video, guys, I'm going to flip this camera out. I'm going to show you the motor. We're going to go through assembling the short block and get it back in the car. And hopefully, maybe by next weekend, we'll have this motor broke in and we'll see if it's any faster. So, stick with me. So, got my motor this morning. It's all decked. This block right here is 3/4 filled. It's 0.5 millimeter over now. So, I'm going to clean this block up, get it scuffed down a little bit, get it painted, then we're ready to assemble. We got our rods and pistons over here. And this is the one major change I made over the factory piston. This piston does have a very slight dome to it, but it is basically a flat top piston. This should raise compression a little bit on the motor. So got all them on there, got an extra one hanging out down there in the box. So how many people are wondering why I'm increasing compression once again on a turbo motor? Because guys, that extra compression equals extra power. So you don't gain a whole lot from the overbore itself. You know, less than 1%, and that isn't nothing when it comes to these motors. So basically, guys, what I done, I went with a flat top piston like that because I had the choice to either buy a factory replacement piston or those at the same cost. And considering we had to change blocks, it was the only way I could really keep it equal to a factory piston while making it also some kind of an improvement. It won't be a big improvement from that stuff alone, but hopefully the other changes I have planned that I haven't told y'all about will make a big difference. But first we gotta get this motor back together, so I guess at this point, let's get this thing cleaned up, taped up, and some fresh paint sprayed on it, because paint on this motor is probably about 15 years old at this point. So yeah, it's due for some more. And as much as Project Freetro's kind of ratty, I did spend some money in this block, and I'm going to paint it to make it look nice. I don't know if you guys noticed, but I just used the old dipstick tube on the masking tape around the deck to, cut the masking tape. Reason for that, because this motor has been decked, just to bring compression height back to the factory specs. The edges of the deck are pretty sharp, so instead of using a knife, use something smooth. It wouldn't harm the deck surface and just run around the edge. Give me a nice clean cut edge. So I'm going to repeat that, tape up the bottom end of it, and we're ready to spray a little color on it. Well, any of you cringing yet? It seems like, going pretty well. So, got my paint here. Just whatever I picked up at the parts store. Because like I said before, not sponsored by anybody, guys. So, I'm going to spray it back pretty much the same color orange it was. If you're wondering, it's a Chevrolet orange. So, just going to spray it again. Give a fresh coat of paint, let it dry, and then we'll re-put this thing together. So, stay tuned. I know some people don't like the orange, but it's already painted orange and has a lot of paint on it, okay? I painted that thing, you know, like I said, about 15 years ago at this point. So, it's going to stick out like a sore thumb in there, but I really don't care. So, the point is, guys, you do something like this, make it your own. Do what you want to do. Paint it pink if you want to, or white, or blue, or orange, or, you know, any colored rainbow. So, at this point, I got the bottom of it painted. When I say the bottom, the blocks sitting on the deck. That way, everything that you don't see when the motor's in the car has some paint on it. When that tacks up, I'm going to flip it over, spray top side. When that's dry, I'll be back. So, wish me luck. And a lot of you may be thinking, well, what about the places where the tape missed it? It's real easy, guys. You're going to take a towel, something like, you know, this, a little brake cleaner or a little lacquer thinner. You can wipe that paint right off your sealing surfaces. So that's what I'm going to do now. So watch along. So I spray my towel with a little brake cleaner here. As you can see, there's some paint along this edge. Take your brake cleaner. It eats that paint right off. It's a pretty easy little process. You know, you got quite a bit around through here. So pretty much anywhere you're not going to want that paint to stay, you're going to wipe it off with your towel. So I'm going to get back to that, and I'll be back here in a few minutes. So a lot of you are probably wondering, why don't you just go and get to the engine assembly portion, paint it later? Because, guys, to do it right, you need to paint it before you assemble it. You know, this isn't 100% about doing it the right way, but the cheap way at this point. So I've got the motor ready to assemble at this point. Bought a new set of main and rod bearings. Cheapest thing Rock Auto had that was a good name brand bearing that I knew of. So if you want the part number for a standard size bearing, pause this video. So I was going to reuse the old bearings on the motor because they still look good, guys. Project Freetro's engine was not a catastrophic failure. It was just a weak, you know, a weak block. So we tried to fix that by partial filling that block. It didn't work out. So this block I know will hold over 30 pounds boost and over 10,000 RPM because I've already done it on it. It's also a reason why this motor stayed in my collection. So we're going to freshen it up here, and this will be Freetro's new bottom end. So I'm going to put you on a little time lapse here. I'm going to get these main caps off, get these main bearings in there, get the crank sprayed off, and I'll come back in when it comes time to torque the main caps. I'll give y'all all the specs and how to do that too. Alright, guys. Another thing to note, I don't know if you can see the difference in these bearing shells here, but one of these has a groove and one of them small or smooth. The hole right here is going to line up with your oil holes in your block. So you want to make sure that your saddles are clean. Your bearing will pretty much just push in there flush like that right there. And then I'm going to put the rest of these in. And your cap side is going to go the same way. You have a little tang right in here. You're going to push it in there with your fingers until it's flush. So just wanted to pop in here, show you all that, because it's super important. And if you're wondering about the groove and the oil hole, here's your groove, here's your oil hole, and your smooth side is going to go up on your main cap. Now, these are a brand new set of bearings. And they may look a little rough in the picture, but I assure you in person they are perfectly smooth and you don't feel any of these places that you see. Now, another easy thing on these motors for people to forget is the thrust bearing that goes right here. And I'll pop back in when it's time to install that. And alright guys, I got all my bearings and all the caps, all the bearings in the block. So now we're ready for these thrust washers. These are what I ordered right here. You can pause the video for the part number. And they do sell thrust bearings in an oversized. But these are standard. And basically guys, these just sit right here in this block like this right here. And as you can see, they'll pretty much stay on their own. If you're worried about them falling out, just a little light smear of grease or some assembly lube on the back side of them will help them stay in place. I'm going to put just a little assembly lube on the back sides just to help them stick. And then I'm going to lube all our bearings with some assembly lube and get our main caps back on there and run down kind of hand tight, and then it'll be time to torque those things. And alright guys, I'm back. This is the assembly lube I'd got. I've never used this Lucas lube before, but it was all that the local AutoZone had as far as an assembly lube. It looks like it pretty much stays in place wherever you put it, so that's a positive. If you were going to run this motor immediately after putting it together, I would just use some engine oil to lube this stuff up. But the assembly lube just gives you a few extra seconds of protection just on that startup. But you have a thrust bearing on each side. It's on the third main cap back. You got one on the rear side and one on the front side. Most American V8s have them on the front and back side the whole 360 degrees of the cap. These motors do not, and they are literally only a half of a thrust bearing. So I'm going to put some assembly lube on these bearings, and usually I'll just kind of smear it with my finger. And on the outside of our thrust washers also. You don't want to have to go wild with this stuff. You just want for the immediate startup until the motor gets oil pressure. This will help protect your bearings. So basically we got them all lubed up there. And I have roughly cleaned off our crank from before. And your crank's just going to sit down in there. So at this point I'm going to take some more of that lube. Just going to put it on the top sides of these right here on our main journals. And we should have plenty of lube in there. So at this point, your main caps have an arrow, and they are numbered 1 through, 4, because we only got 4 of them. So you want to make sure they're in their correct position. Number 1 will always be on the crank pulley side, and your last number, which will be number 4 on this one, will always be towards the back of the motor. So at this point, we need to look up torque specs for the main caps, get our torque wrench out, get it set, and then come back and torque these main caps. And alright guys, I'm going to pop back into me walking across the garage, because if you'll check out above my Blue Collar Performance in JB's little shop, check these guys out. Main bearing bolts right here, okay? Those are going to torque to 40 foot-pounds. So 40 foot-pounds isn't a whole lot of torque, guys. So let's get these things torqued, and I'm going to sit y'all down here. Well, hopefully. Or maybe not. But I'm going to torque these main caps. I'm going to flip the camera around here in just a minute. And I'll be back. And I'm back, guys. This would be a lot easier if the engine was actually mounted on something. But generally, when I torque main bolts like this, it's always nice to have a helper. But if you don't have a helper, you just kind of got to get however you can get it. And in this case, just using my knee as a friend. And I'm pretty much just preemptively pulling these until we get to our torque spec. And then I'm going to go back and check them. If something falls off my little cart. But you just want to make sure you go back and check these things. If you're real worried about motor clearances or your bearing clearances, say you had some bad bearings, I would highly suggest that you plastic gauge this stuff. Me, I'm just pretty much putting a standard bearing in it on a standard size crank. And as long as everything pretty much moves free, guys, you're pretty gold. So, crank spins smooth as glass on that fresh lube. There's no discernible thrust. And all the specs for these clearances and the thrust clearance are in the factory service manual. I've done enough motors that I can pretty much feel if it's in good shape or not. But pretty much at that point, guys, our crank's installed. So, super easy. Would have been a lot easier with it mounted onto something. But here we are. So at this point, I'm ready to put the oil pump on and the rear main seal cover on. And then we can flip this thing over and put the rods and pistons in. But there's more than that, than just assembling the rods and pistons. Because we need to check the ring gap. Because I'm going to really lean on this motor this time, and that stuff's super important. So if you watched my last Geo Metro video where I put the crank seal on the Project Blue Balls, this is the rear main seal for Project Freetro. And it's pretty much, guys, going to go in this housing right here. So basically, I'm going to lightly coat the outside of this with a little, RTV. I'm going to tap it in the housing, and I'll be back when it's time to bolt it on. There's no sense in me going over some of this stuff that's covered in other videos. So make sure you check out that video. Pretty much anytime you're installing a rubber knock-in seal like that, that's generally how I personally do it. A lot of people just put them in dry, and then sometimes you'll still have a leak, guys. So just another helpful tip. Be back. And alright, guys, get that rear main seal installed. Usually when you put just a little bit of RTV around the edge, you can literally push these seals in here with your fingers, guys. And that takes any risk of hitting it with a hammer out of the equation. So for a rear main seal cover, you have a gasket right here. And this gasket pretty much just goes on this housing. Somewhat similar to this. And there's a couple of dowels that'll either usually stay on the housing or in the block right here. So, another thing I like to do, I'm going to lightly just coat this on both sides with just a little RTV. Like I said, it comes down to personal preference on what you like to do. I personally hate oil leaks, and this is the way that I keep from having them. And when I say just a little bit, guys, I mean I pretty much put a almost transparent layer. Like this, I'm just going to put just a hair. Not even enough to really squish out. And RTV got a bad name, mostly from people who just take the tube and just glob it on there like that. So you use it sparingly. It is not bad, evil stuff. So I'm going to repeat that there, and I'm going to repeat it on this side. Just ever so lightly. Just enough to prevent any kind of leaks that may happen from using just a cheap gasket like these are. This is some no-name gasket set I bought off eBay. Because, let's face it guys, it's a cheap car, cheap project, and I'm not going to spend a fortune on a set of gaskets. So, just a super light smear on the block and a super light smear on the housing. Now I'm going to take my finger and put a little of this assembly lube right here where our main seal rides. I'm just going to put a little lube on it. And usually I'll lube the inside of the seal, but in this case, since the crank is readily exposed, I'm just going to lube it. And here's where you need to be kind of careful. You want to make sure that your rear main seal gently rolls up on there, and then your housing's pretty much home. Now, these are held on with 10mm bolts. And as you notice, I did not clean these bolts up. Mostly because I forget. And you'll never see them in the bell housing. So, get these started. I'm going to go here and check my torque spec, and I'll be back, guys. And if you're a stickler, those rear main seal cap bolts, okay? I'm going to flip the camera around and show you the spec. Right above my buddy Bill here at Flatbroke Garage and Something Garage, Alex over there. Check those guys out if you're interested in Torino stuff, guys. So basically, rear main seal housing bolts right here, they torque to 106 inch-pounds. And what does 106 inch-pounds equate to when you don't have a inch-pound torque wrench? 1/4 inch strap ratchet, guys. This stuff doesn't have to be rocket science. So, just like any kind of gasket right there, you just want to lightly snug these. Because if I recall correctly, that's less than 10 foot-pounds. So, just, you know, take one finger and pull, one finger and pull, one finger and pull. And our rear main seal cover is installed. So, I know that some of y'all see this, where your gasket sticks up, and the reason for that is they make this stuff long, guys, so it can be trimmed for your application. So you can just take a razor knife or a razor blade like that and cut it off flush. Now our oil pump gasket's going to be up here. It's going to be the same way, and we're going to have to trim it down here at the edge. So that's going to be our same thing. The only thing I want to do different on this, guys, is I am not going to use RTV around our oil port or our oil port. So pretty much, guys, I'm going to install this gasket right here dry, except for just a little RTV up here at the top corners. And the reason why I say up here at the top corners, it's going to be like this, and over time oil can seep out of these cracks, guys, and cause you a leak that you may think's your oil pan. And I know I'm probably going to get a comment. These right here equate to your thrust bearing and your clearances when this motor was assembled factory. And another thing, guys, especially if you're using a new oil pump, this is Project Freetro's original oil pump. I'll take some of this assembly lube and put it down here in this pump. and pretty much hold it flat and spin it a few times until the gears are coated. And what that does, it'll help it build oil pressure faster. If you'll also notice, you got four little pointy pieces right here. These correspond, guys, over here to your crankshaft. And you got two flats on your crankshaft right here. We'll rotate right there. You can see them right there. And you can see the witness marks where those two little pointed areas in the oil pump right here sat before. So it makes it a lot easier if you line your oil pump up with those grooves. And then most of the time, without much fight, it will literally kind of just go on there. Once again, with your seal, you need to make sure that your crank seal does not get bound up on this lip. And it looks like it's going to fight me a little bit, so I'm going to set y'all off to the side, and I'll be back here in a moment. And alright guys, I got our oil pump on there. Now, I would take you to the service manual, but these torque to 97 inch-pounds, which is about right at 8 foot-pounds of torque. So I just went here in my little corner drive ratchet and just snugged those up pretty good. That was after I fought with a crank seal lip in here not wanting to go around. I just took a piece of stiff cardboard and kind of run it around through there as I was pushing the pump on, and it fell right back into place. So I got to put this oil galley plug in right here, which has somehow gotten misplaced over the years. Luckily, Project Freetro's motor down there has one in it. So let's get that out and get that cleaned up. And I think I'll go ahead and put the water pump on it before I flip the motor over and we start, measuring the piston ring gap. And alright guys, as you see, I've already got the water pump on there. I pretty much done it like I've done the rest of the gaskets, just a very light smear of RTV around them. And, snugged them down with a 1/4 inch drive ratchet. Not really like T-manning this stuff, guys, but just kind of, one finger pulling it. So, I got our pipe plug in there. And I did put a little RTV around it also, because it will last longer than pipe tape in this situation. So at this point, we're ready to check the piston ring gap. And once we get the piston ring gap checked, we can get the rings on the pistons and the pistons on the motor. So at this point, I'm going to pause the video again. I'm going to go over here and get my rings out, guys. And I'll show you how to check the piston ring gap. And alright guys, here's where I'm going to lose some of you, okay? Now, the factory specs on these rings, okay? You'll have a second ring and a first groove ring. This stuff can be marked on your new piston rings, right? Well, the factory spec on a Geometry motor for a standard bore, okay? Keep in mind this motor is 0.5 millimeter over, is a 0.007, which is 7 thousandths of an inch, to 11 thousandths, which is 0.011. That is the factory service spec, okay? And if you're wanting to build a type motor or a low boost motor, I would like to see it on the, the 10 to 11 thousandth side of that spec. They also throw a max spec out there of 27 thousandths, which is something more like what I would use on like a turbo LS or a V8 turbo motor. Usually on stuff like that, I usually, depending on the boost level, I'll get the ring somewhere between 26 and 30 thousandths. I usually stagger the first and second ring by about 2 thousandths. And I usually leave the oil ring standard. So basically, guys, what I'm going to do, I'm going to check these rings. And as long as they fall somewhere between the max spec, which is 11 thousandths, and the 27 thousandths, I'm going to check them and see where we're at. And from there, we can determine if we need to follow these rings or not to achieve the proper ring gap. Now, few of you know that this car is fixing to go through some big changes, and that's part of it with this motor. I'm fixing to really start leaning on this thing with boost, so I really want everything kind of super loose in it. And that's kind of important when it comes to turbo motor, guys, because if your ring gaps are too tight, you're going to bust the ring lands off your pistons, and that will cause early engine failure. And you'll be back at the same point of where I'm at now, and you're putting a motor together, even though that's not what we had happen. But you're pretty much going to be in the same place. You're going to be building a motor at that point. So let me check these ring gaps, and I'll bring y'all back in when I get to measuring everything. And alright guys, here's where I'm going to lose some of you, okay? Now, the factory specs on these rings, okay? You'll have a second ring and a first groove ring. You know, this stuff can be marked on your new piston rings, right? Well, the factory spec on a Geo Metro motor for a standard bore, okay? Keep in mind this motor is 0.5 millimeter over, is a 0.007, which is 7 thousandths of an inch, to 11 thousandths, which is 0.011. That is the factory service spec, okay? And if you're wanting to build a tight motor or a low boost motor, I would like to see it on the, you know, the 10 to 11 thousandth side of that spec. They also throw a max spec out there of 27 thousandths, which is something more like what I would use on like a turbo LS or a V8 turbo motor. Usually on stuff like that, I usually, depending on the boost level, I'll get the ring somewhere between 26 and 30 thousandths. I usually stagger the first and second ring by about 2 thousandths, and I usually leave the O-ring standard. So basically, guys, you know, what I'm going to do, I'm going to check these rings, and as long as they fall somewhere between the max spec, which is 11 thousandths, and the 27 thousandths, I'm going to check them and see where we're at. And from there, we can determine if we need to file these rings or not to achieve the proper ring gap. Now, few of you know that this car is fixing to go through some big changes, and that's part of it with this motor. I'm fixing to really start leaning on this thing with boost, so I really want everything kind of super loose in it. And that's kind of important when it comes to turbo motor, guys, because if your ring gaps are too tight, you're going to bust the ring lands off your pistons, and that will cause early engine failure. And you'll be back at the same point of where I'm at now, and you're putting a motor together, even though that's not what we had happen. But you're pretty much going to be in the same place. You're going to be building a motor at that point. So let me check these ring gaps, and I'll bring y'all back in when I get to measuring everything. And alright guys, I'm back. So I had to buy a 4-cylinder set of pistons, so I have an extra piston and an extra piston ring. Now, where this comes important, this is going to set my depth down in the cylinder and square up the new piston ring so I can measure the clearance of them. So I'm going to flip you all around and let you watch this process, and I'll probably talk a little bit in it. That way y'all know what's going on. Okay, so we got our piston with our other new ring on there, and I'm just going to use this piston and ring to square these new rings up in the bore. And the reason why I'm doing it this way, this new piston ring makes a nice flat stop on our new deck, and it also sets our height right at the top of the bore for our new piston ring. So we got all our rings squared up here, and I can see the gaps in them pretty well, and they're good and square. So basically what I'm going to do, I'm going to take a 11 thousandths feeler gauge, and if you don't have a set of these, they sell these at Harbor Freight. So I know 11 thousandths was our max factory spec, and we easily pass 11 thousandths in all these ring gaps, which is not unusual with an aftermarket ring, guys, because, you know, it's pretty normal for them to be loose if you don't file fit them. And this is one of them motors that I'm not aware if there's a file fit set of rings for them or not. But sometimes you can buy a larger overbore ring and then file it down to fit. So it didn't pass our 11 thousandths of normal spec, okay? So I'm going to check at 27 thousandths for our max spec and see if it'll pass. And they're tighter than 27 thousandths. So at this point, we have no idea what this ring gap is. So I'm going to drop down to a 21 thousandths, which is probably about where I would like this motor to be gapped at for a maximum boost RPM situation, and to see if it will pass. And it will pass tightly. So it looks like our top ring gap's going to be about 21 thousandths, and I'm good with that, which means I'm not going to have to do any filing of the rings. So I'm going to pull these rings out, and now we need to check our second piston ring groove. So I'm going to pretty much repeat what I did with the top ring, and I'm going to put these in the bores, just like I did before. Just kind of being careful not to damage them or the bore itself. I'm just going to get these rings kind of started in here where they can sit, and I'm going to take that extra top ring we have off my extra piston, and I'm going to put it in our second ring groove down here. And now I have the height for the second piston ring, the second compression ring. So I'm going to push that ring down there. I'm going to push it down there until it's square. And I'm going to push it down there until it's square. So now I'm pretty much going to repeat the same process, except I'm going to start with this 21 thousandths. So, and see how our ring gap is. And these rings are right at 21 thousandths. If not, just a hair wider. So let me check it with 23. And the 23 is a good tight fit. So what that tells us is our ring gap is 21 thousandths on the top ring and 23 thousandths on the second ring. So I'm going to write that down. Now you can go through this and check your oil rings if you wish. But I found that I have never had an issue related to the oil rings with piston ring gap. So if you're going to do the oil ring, the oil scraper ring, which is the thin rings that go on each side of your oil control ring here, your expander ring, you would repeat the process the same way again. So at this point, we're ready to put the rings on the pistons and get the pistons installed, guys, and then we put the rods in it. You know, that said, guys, and I'm going to kind of talk through why I'm pulling my pistons and stuff out of the box here. You really want to check that piston ring gap, especially in a nitrous or turbo application. Because like I told you before, if the ring gap's too tight, those rings will butt together in the bore and it will break your piston ring lands. And I have seen them over time pop the top of the piston off. That's bad stuff when that happens. So basically, the pistons and rods were pressed onto the machine shop. He done a really great job. Even though it did take a little longer than we anticipated, I can't say enough good things. There's not many shops, guys, that care about small motors like these. Because to most people, they're the stowaway stuff, right? he has always went out of his way to pretty much help me. And I know sometimes in some of these videos it seemed like I was complaining that the motor wasn't ready. And that was mostly because I didn't want to lose you guys as a viewer. Because we're so close to actually making something of this channel. We have enough subscribers and we're real close on watch hours. But the videos usually don't read real well, guys. And this Project Freetro is the real big videos of my channel. So I was getting somewhat impatient, which I like to put stuff, you know, when I ready to do something, I'm ready to do it. But I can't say enough good things about him and his quality of work. We kind of have something in the works that maybe later I'll be able to help you guys where 3Tech is kind of quit selling ported head packages for these cars. We've been kind of working on stuff in the background that's what he does, is basically head porting. Regular engine machine is kind of a secondary deal. So we had talked about trying to offer ported head packages. You know, head, camshaft type deal. So real close to being there on that. And actually, one of my viewers is probably going to be the first recipient of a ported cylinder head from him. And it will be flowed. And I will share that information here on my channel. Now, keep in mind, the head that is on Project Freetro I done here in my garage. And it is by no means a professional port job. I know just enough about head porting to be dangerous sometimes. And, you know, in a lot of applications, that gets you a long ways. It has with Project Freetro. But Project Freetro, guys, I wanted this stuff to be where you could replicate it in your home garage. So that's kind of the important thing. And anytime you assemble, you know, piston rings on piston, you want to make sure that they have a notch or a dot or a taper to them. You want to make sure that they're faced the correct way. And, you know, these are, I have no idea what brand these rings are. They were supposed to be evergreen stuff, and God only knows. But enough rambling on about that. He's went out of his way, guys, to mess with this stuff. And he's got a real interest in it also. So hopefully I'll have another outlet for you guys to be able to have a ported cylinder head package. And it won't be a head done by me, but it will be professionally done by my buddy at his machine shop with his flow bench. So, little story here. I took the extra cylinder head that I have in my garage. It was actually donated by Turbo Dano off the Geo Metro forums. It is currently at his shop. So, we're going to see what he comes up with. But at this point, I got all my rings on piston number 1. And I'm going to do these one at a time, guys. And a lot of you, I will show you on one of the other pistons how to put the rings on and everything. But it's getting kind of late, and I wanted to get this short block together tonight. So stick with me, and I'll be right back. Alright, guys. So I got my new rod bearings installed. And these have oil holes up here that actually spray the piston pan through your rod right here. You can see the hole right there. And that shoots pressurized oil up towards the cylinder wall and your piston pan. So here's the standard rod bearing part number. If you want to pause that video for that. These are just Engine Tech bearings. Like I said, the cheapest thing I could get off Rock Auto that was a good quality bearing. So got our rod bearings in there. So now we need to put them piston rings in there. So what you want to do, you're going to start off with your two little thin guide rings here, which are your oil scraper rings. Get them untangled. Guys, and then you have your expander ring right here. Your expander ring is going to go on first, and that goes in your third groove down here. And these, I just like to spiral them on. And for no real reason, I just line these up with the wrist pin with this gap on this side, and I'm going to put the other gap on the other side. I always like to try to stagger my ring gaps 180 degrees from each other. And right here we have our second groove ring, and these actually do have a dot on them, and the dot's going to face up, and I'm going to put it 180 degrees from the other oil ring and get it on there like that. And then our top piston ring is non-directional on this, so you don't want to end up with your gaps lined up like this, guys. That'll give you compression problems. So you want to make sure these ring gaps are 180 degrees apart, and most of your ring packages will actually have these instructions on them. So at this point, I'm going to take my little crappy ring expander here, or ring compressor, and you're going to notice that I didn't lube this set of rings like I did the last time we put rings in Project Freethrow. And there's a reason for that right now. The cylinder walls are already oiled down in this motor, so I'm going to put these rings in dry. So basically you want to make sure your tool is pretty snug like that, and you're ready to pretty much go in the cylinder. But first, I like to put a little assembly lube on a rod bearing down here, and I like to put some up here on a wrist pin. Even though he done a good job and lubed our wrist pins when he pressed the pistons on the rods. But I like to just kind of work a little extra assembly lube in there. And you'll also have an arrow on this piston and here, and that's going to face the front of your motor. So I'm going to have to move y'all real quick. I'm going to move you back up here. I'm going to have to kind of reposition you. But I got the crank turned where it's facing downward. That way we don't nick the crank journals with our rod bolts. So I just like to kind of tap around here to make sure our ring compressor is square, our arrow's facing the front of the motor, and you can take a rubber-ended hammer, something like this, and you should be able to just drive it on home like that. And you'll notice I didn't knock it all the way down, and there's a reason for that. Is because I want to be able to guide that rod around this crank journal. So what I'll do, I'll lightly tap it like this until I start to feel the rod near my fingers, and then I can take my fingers and guide these rod bolts around the crank journal. And keep in mind, if you have to hit any of this stuff hard, guys, you've got a problem, and back up and check from there. So a little assembly lube on our lower cap. I'm just going to spread that around with our finger too. And this rod cap will also have an arrow right here, and that's going to face the front of the motor. Now, the orientation of this stuff is super important, so make sure that you put this stuff in the correct positions. And I'm just going to take a 1/4 inch drive ratchet and run these down until I get all of the pistons installed. And I'll bring y'all back when it's time to torque it. But I'm just going to snug these up with my 1/4 inch drive ratchet. Just to make sure that when I turn this motor, it doesn't spin our rod bearings in the cap. And at any time you feel extra pressure and this motor's not smooth to turn, you need to stop where you're at and back up a step. But I'll always rotate the motor at least 1 full turn till our rod journal is all the way down again on this 3rd cylinder back. And basically, guys, I'm just going to repeat the process that we've been going. So I'm going to get this 3rd piston in here, and I'll be back and I'll show you another important spec that we need to check. So be back here in just a few, guys. And all right, guys, we're at the point where we're ready to torque our connecting rod bearings. So the factory spec on them is 26 foot-pounds. So got my torque wrench out, got it set to 26 foot-pounds, and we're going to torque these. Which that's only about half the torque spec of the main cap bolts. But I like to double check them, guys. So you got one torque. You don't have to rotate your motor. Remember what I said, that if your motor's not easy to rotate, you need to start looking for a problem. Because if your motor's tight, you've either pinched a ring, you didn't check your bearing clearances, just like I didn't, and your bearings are too tight, or you may have had a rod bearing move in the cap, or some kind of other problem. So, engine assembly is not something you want to get in a hurry on. And even though it looks like I've gotten in a hurry to do this, I have literally just taken my time. I started this about 3 o'clock, and it's about 6 o'clock now, so I'm about 3 hours in, and I have already cleaned this stuff up. So you just don't want to come in here and start ripping bolts around, especially when they torque to such a light torque spec as these do. And we got all our rod caps torqued, all our main caps are torqued. And we're going to spin this motor over again. And here's where we're going to get into the other spec, guys. You want to bring the number 1 piston up the top dead center. And on a performance type build like what we're building, we're going to bring this piston all the way up the top dead center. And we're going to check our piston to deck clearance right here. Now, the factory geo spec is about 15 thousandths, and that is what I asked him to set these at. So that'll give us about 30 thousandths of quench, which is clearance from the top of our piston to the bottom of our cylinder head. And a tight quench, guys, helps a lot with detonation. And that's just going to come in real important here very soon. So I'm going to step over here and get my micrometer. I'm going to pause the video, and I'll be right back. And now would be one of them times where, you know, you get this nice fancy, you know, digital micrometer that you never use. You take it out and your batteries are dead. But luckily they still got a manual scale. and that don't help a lot either, especially on something that fine. So what I'm going to do, got a 14 thousandths filler gauge right here. I'm just going to kind of see, you know, this isn't necessarily the correct way to do this, but it does work because this is, you know, like I said, 14 thousandths, factory specs 15, so I should be able to feel the piston a little over the top of the filler gauge. And this is literally the non-scientific way to do this, and a bad time to find out that your micrometer battery is dead. So, it looks like, guys, we're all pretty close. So, which it should be close. It should all be dead on. And usually I'll check that, and that just assures that our deck is square. But I did have this motor decked because these aftermarket pistons do have a small difference in compression height because they're for 1.3 liter. And most of your aftermarket pistons are going to be way, way below your deck. So it's an important spec to have checked, especially if your motor goes to the machine shop, because you don't want to end up with your pistons way down the bore, because that's going to kill your compression, guys. And this is just another way to gain some compression, is to make sure that you got a good tight quench without being too tight, that you have issues where your piston at high RPMs is going to hit the cylinder head. If that happens, you have lots of bad stuff going on. And I read about a guy on the forum that actually had that problem happen. And at that point, guys, you're pretty much just kind of screwed. Unless you have the piston surfaced to, you know, thin the top of the piston out. Or you, I don't even know if they make a steel shim, but like for a small block Chevrolet, they make a steel shim head gasket that is used for stuff that has been over machined or improperly machined to take up that gap. But this filling of it with a filler gauge, it feels like we're about dead on from where we need to be. So I'm going to call it good. I know it is above deck, and like I said, it's about 14 thousandths, 15 thousandths. That's my 15 thousandths filler gauge right there, and we're right there, guys. So it's that point I want to trust his machining, and I know that he is very, very particular about this stuff, and it is probably no less than perfect. But it's always good just to double check this stuff for yourself, because not all the time, guys, are you going to send an extra crankshaft, an extra set of bearings and stuff to the machine shop so they can set this stuff up and actually set this clearances here correctly. So at this point, guys, we're ready to put the oil pan and the oil pickup tube on it. I don't know if I have an oil pickup tube oil ring. If I don't, I'll have to source one of those. And I'll be back here in a few. And alright, this is one of the things I'm going to have to bring y'all in close for. And you notice this stuff is still kind of dirty in here. It is clean. That is just old baked on residue. But got our oil pump O-ring in there. That's super important, guys. You leave that out and you will not have any oil pressure, which means your motor will be junk. So there's two little 10mm bolts going here. And those things torque, guys, like all the other bolts, to some inch-pounds, which equates to about 8 foot-pounds of torque. These are just 6mm threaded bolts. So once again, guys, I'm just going to take my 1/4" drive ratchet and give those little things the one finger pull and call them good. And I should not have any issues whatsoever. And that replicates about the same torque that when I took this motor apart that it took to get these bolts out. So You always want to make sure that your oil pickup tube is clean. All this stuff's clean. And I'll squirt some extra assembly lube down on that O-ring before I push this down in there. Because this stuff's very important, guys. Any failure in this oil system, from this gasket to here to this O-ring to this tube, is going to result in you not having any oil pressure. So at this point, I'm going to snug them the rest of the way up. Our oil pan is over here and clean. So it looks like I'm about ready to put the oil pan back on it, guys. So be back here in just a minute. And now we're on to the greatest debate in the geo world. Oil pan gasket or no oil pan gasket? Well, our engine kit comes with one. And to be honest, guys, I have never put one on a geo motor. I always RTV'd the pan on because that's the way they are from the factory. So maybe we'll just test putting a gasket on it, see if it makes any difference. The only thing that's really going to make a difference is our pickup tube to the base of the pan. I really don't think that it's going to make that much of a difference. So I'm going to put a gasket on it this time. So I'm going to pretty much just repeat what I always do, guys. I'm going to take some RTV. And if you don't want to do that with RTV, at least make sure you put some here at the seams where your covers go on, because you will have a leak there. So basically, I'm just going to just put a light smear on this stuff, guys. And let's see how the gasket does, because I've never put one on one of these, and I've got it, and if I don't ever put them on, then why do I need it? So maybe this is a good way to get rid of this gasket to come in this engine kit. Because like I said, I've never seen a Metro with an oil pan gasket, and as y'all know, I have quite a few of them, and I have personally never put one on one. So I'm just going to give this just a little light smear, guys, just along this pan edge. And like that. And we'll plop this gasket on here. Which is some kind of cork / rubber variant. And I'm just going to repeat it on the other side. And like I said, guys, I'm not going to put a whole lot on it. Just a little smear. Just a little thin coat, because that little thin coat might be the difference between a new gasket leaking and not leaking. And you never want to put RTV on stuff like your oil pump O-ring, because you will have problems there. So I won't bore you with watching me smear RTV on there, but like I said, just little light smear, guys, and I'll be back. Oh, so as you can see, I got that smear on our pan, or on our pan rail. Our oil pan is clean, even though it don't really look like it is clean. And I'm gonna drop it on there, and I'm gonna cheat a little bit and not reuse the factory bolts, because I have a bunch of nut and bolt assortments with a large excess of the correct threaded screws for this oil pan. And I'm going to use them. So, you know, they're just a 6x100 thread. And I'm just going to replace them with new ones instead of clean old ones. So, I said 6x100. It's 6x1.0, guys. That's just one of the things that over the years that a lot of people just say it. And it's a 6x1.0 threaded bolt. And because I got an excess of them, I'm just going to use them for the oil pan. Plus, they look all pretty shiny, so nobody will ever see them but me, but it's a lot better than cleaning all the old RTV and stuff off the old bolts. And it gets rid of some of these extra bolts that I have that just seem to multiply. So now we got all our bolts hand started, guys. I'm literally going to repeat the process that I've done 100 times and showed y'all here. I'm just going to run all these down with my 1/4" drive ratchet. Except this time, since we've added the gasket in here, I'm going to tighten them down a little bit different. And when I get to that point, after I run these other 700 bolts down, I'll come back and I'll show you how I'm torquing them. And alright guys, I got all them bolts ran down. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just kind of snug these down until they start to get a little tension on them, since we put a gasket on it. Now, if you had just RTV'd it, we'd just hammer these things on down, and I would call it good, and our RTV will form around any defects that we have. But since we added the gasket in here, what you want to do, you can see in here, you want to snug this gasket, guys, until you see that gasket just start to squish, okay? Or where your RTV is, you'll see it start to come out. You don't want to hammer these down with a gasket because it will push it out. So basically, I'm just going to snug them up pretty decent by hand and watch what my gasket's doing, and I'll go from there. But pretty much, guys, we got an assembled short block at this point, and there's one mega important thing that I will flip this over and show you tonight. Assuming I can get this motor to sit, I may have to leave it sitting upside down like this. So, and alright guys, I'm going to have to wait the next video to show you that other special thing that you absolutely cannot forget, which is this little oil check valve. This goes in the deck surface of your block, and I'll cover this in the next video, but you can't lose this little guy. He's mega important. So basically, guys, our short block's together, and we're ready to make it a long block. But just to ease everything, like torquing this head and stuff down, I'm probably going to put it back in the car as a short block, and then put the head and stuff back on it from there. So make sure you stay tuned to the next episode of how to make your Geo Metro faster, because this is absolutely what we're doing, is making it faster, because it don't run right now. So stay tuned, guys, and I appreciate you watching. If you're not subscribed, please hit that subscribe button. If you haven't liked the video, make sure you hit that too. It just helps YouTube pick this stuff up, guys. It gets some of this information out to people that might not see it or even know it. So look forward to hearing from you. Make sure you comment down below, and I'll see you at the next one. Thanks for watching.